Tower Fantasy's global devs are trolling tank mains by nerfing Ironheart Meryl. Brevi and Asuka had no changes, 1-to-1 numbers in their healer and tanking kits when they came over from CN to global. Maybe this meant that they were finally done with their constant nerfs on tanks, and Meryl will turn out great, and they actually nerfed her party-wide damage buff from 20% to 10%? What? I thought Asuka keeping her CN numbers meant that the developers in Global finally came to their senses and realized that they really shouldn't touch any of the Fortitude characters' tanking numbers when bringing them from CN over to Global. Because they've been doing that the entire time with healers. Going back all the way to Lyra, Lyra kept her 15% party-wide damage buff from CN. Fiona's Link ability didn't get any changes from CN to Global. Her resistance shred wasn't lowered, and Brevi as a support is the exact same as she is in CN from A0 to A6. If the CN numbers for healers is already an established trend in Global, then there is zero reason for the global devs to nerf tanks below CN numbers. But Mimi got her 15% resistance shred nerfed down all the way to 0, and Meryl's 20% resistance shred is nerfed to 10. I guess Asuka had special protection since she's a collab character, but what is going to happen when the CN devs, which I'll be referring to as Hoda, finally figures out what they want tanks to do and how they should design their gameplay, and finally releases the long-awaited Alter tank? Will the global devs just continue their habit of nerfing every new tank that releases to global? Are they going to nerf the Alter tank's damage buffs for the team by cutting them in half, or maybe even removing them entirely like they did with Meryl and Mimi? Because if they do that, it is very likely that the Alter tank won't be as strong as Fiona is for healers, which would pretty much kill the tank role in global. It definitely seems like, looking at Meryl's CN kit for tanking, that Hoda seems to be cooking up something, most likely in preparation for the Alter tank, so that TOF can finally move away from the 2 healer 2 DPS dominance and back to the intended 2 DPS 1 healer and 1 tank team setup that the game keeps recommending but nobody actually ever follows. Meryl has really good charge rate, especially at A1. Her A6 gives damage protection for the entire team, and this is really good Ascension scaling. Their Ascensions are really well designed because your team really only needs damage protection in the extremely difficult content for leaderboards like High Difficulty Origin of War. So free-to-plays and low spenders can stop at A1 and aren't pressured to go all the way to A6 like with Brevi, who definitely needs A6 to function as a proper healer. Meryl's trait allows her to become the main taunt character by giving full charge at the start of a fight, allowing her to keep enemies permanently taunted with her discharge ability. As an added bonus, her trait gives her 50% more shatter, which is really good for people who missed out or skipped A3 Asuka. And finally, the most important part of a character, how much damage they can contribute to a team. Lyra's 15% damage buff is the lowest out of any of the other healers, which is why I consider this number to be the bare minimum of any support or fortitude character to buff their team with. Meryl's resistance shred is actually a little higher than that, at 20%, and this is from Meryl straight out of the box at A0. So Meryl is actually an amazing tank in CN. All of the tanks since Mimi's release have very good long-term potential in CN. If they release a healer that's so good that it replaces Lyra, well, Mimi can still activate 4-piece 0 with her team shielding, together with her 15% resistance shred, Meryl, and the Alter tank, and the Fortitude role has a very free-to-play friendly setup that can contribute to a party's overall damage to the same level as healers do. Asuka isn't as free-to-play friendly, but her kit is still very solid with long-term potential. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the 3 of them in Global. The Global devs keep gutting these tanks whenever they get released, when their tanking numbers and values should be left untouched, and the same as CN. Mimi is very likely to be benched by Meryl in Global, and by the time the Alter tank releases in Global, maybe she'll get nerfed so hard that both Meryl and the Alter tank will just be benched by a full healer setup. This is just speculation on my part, but Hoda probably knows that they can't keep putting in forced tank mechanics into TOF for the rest of its entire lifespan. Most of the forced tank mechanics are only found in high difficulty, high level Origin of War, and it's usually the very last or the last few floors, so tanks aren't even actually involved in most of Origin of War. And the other game mode where they're forced in is Frontier Clash Evolution, which again is only found in the higher levels of FCE, and even in those, you can usually get away with using 2 healers instead of actually following the forced tank mechanics. And second of all, every forced tank mechanic has more or less just been the same. The interference debuff reduces a DPS's damage by 90% if they have an aggro. Another mechanic in Origin is Colton slowing down the aggro target until they can't even move or attack, so the tank has to keep aggro. Rudolph greatly reduces a DPS's damage if they don't attack it from behind, so unless a tank is keeping aggro, Rudolph will always turn to face towards them. All of these forced tank mechanics involve the tank contributing an entire DPS's worth of damage by preventing a DPS from losing all of their damage. Which is a lot like a Fiona Link because Fiona Links usually double a DPS's damage. So instead of the tank giving an indirect Fiona buff in just a small part of content, it's definitely possible that Hoda wants to release an Alter tank that's as strong as Fiona in terms of giving a really powerful damage buff for teammates, so that tanks can just exist naturally in the game and they'll be good in any content, not just in content where they're only forced into. Unfortunately, with the way things are going for Global Fortitude characters, tanking will probably just end up being a role that's played just for fun and not because it's good. I am very certain that the global devs will nerf any party-wide damage buffs that the Alter tank will have, and I wouldn't even be surprised if they just outright remove the damage buffs altogether. About a year ago in my Mimi video, I showed that Fortitude characters' constant nerfs would make the Fortitude Resonance role too weak to be a meaningful role by the time the altered Fortitude character released. Well, it turns out this really might end up becoming true. It would be great if there was some way to let the global devs know that they should give Meryl back her 20% resistance shred in her tanking kit before she's finalized and released, and even more importantly, to tell the global devs to stop fiddling around with Fortitude characters' numbers that specifically affect their performance as tanks in multiplayer gameplay. I'm not sure how that could be done. I think only the big content creators and the players in the test servers are really the only ones to get the devs to notice, and they would need to provide enough feedback to get them to realize that this could become a really big problem when the time comes for Hoda to bring life back into the Fortitude Resonance role and have it make its comeback, but only in CN's Tower Fantasy. Alright, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching this video and have a good one.